H. Friends watch my story till end. They say silence is a form of language, one that only the wise truly master. But that night, when security escorted me out of my own son's wedding, my silence wasn't wisdom. It was restraint. It was the sound of a father who'd seen enough. My name is William Miller, and for 3 decades I've built things that last: homes, hospitals, schools, foundations that hold firm even in storms. But that day the only thing crumbling was the bridge between a father and his son. Ashley Sterling Miller, my new daughter-in-law, thought she was marrying into wealth. In her eyes, I was nothing more than a rough-handed relic from another class, the kind of man who doesn't belong in rooms where champagne costs more than a week's groceries. What she didn't know was that every clause in her marriage contract, every protection, every hidden trigger, had been written by the same unpolished contractor she'd spent 2 years mocking. And when she activated Clause 23, she sealed her own fate. But I'm getting ahead of myself. 2 years earlier, the first time David brought Ashley home, I was still in my work clothes. Faded Carhartt flannel, boots caked with concrete dust, and a Timex watch older than her entire sense of entitlement. I'd spent 12 hours overseeing a foundation pour at a new medical center in Mount Vernon. When she saw me, she tilted her head and smiled, that sharp, patronizing smile people use when they think they're talking to someone beneath them. "It's pronounced nuclear, Mr. Miller," she said when I mentioned a project near a nuclear plant. "Not nuclear." David said nothing. Just stood there, smiling weakly, caught between pride and shame. That moment told me everything I needed to know about the woman he loved, and the man he was becoming. A few weeks later came the engagement dinner. Greenwich, of course. White linen, polished silver, laughter so soft it didn't sound real. Ashley's parents, third-generation hedge fund wealth, looked at me like I'd tracked mud onto their imported carpet. Ashley introduced me as David's father. He owns a small construction company. Small. Miller Construction employs over 260 people. We've built half the schools in Westchester County. But to Ashley, I was the man who fixed sinks. Her mother smiled. That kind of rich people smile that pretends to admire hard work while quietly thanking God they'll never have to do it. "How nice," her mother said. "Manual labor is so honest." Ashley laughed lightly. "Don't worry, mother. David's different. He's Columbia educated, works in investment banking. He won't be swinging hammers." David flushed, tried to defend me. "Dad built his company from nothing. It's actually—" Ashley cut him off, still smiling. "I'm sure your father works very hard." "Works?" The word came out like a stain. I said nothing. I'd learned long ago that some lessons in life teach themselves. Then came the wedding planning, a slow-motion humiliation dressed as family involvement. Ashley would call David with updates, speaking past me like I wasn't even there. "We've booked Meadowbrook Country Club. It's very exclusive. Your father probably isn't familiar with it." Familiar? I'd renovated Meadowbrook's East Wing myself, a $2.3 million project. But I didn't bother correcting her. I just smiled the same way you smile at a storm you know you can't stop. The corrections continued. My grammar, my posture, my table manners. She treated me like a man who'd been invited into her world by accident. And David, my son, never once stood between her words and my dignity. The money requests began subtly. "David, the florist needs $12,000 up front. Can your father help?" Then, "The photographer requires $28,000. Could your father wire that?" It added up, $85,000 for a wedding that seemed designed to erase every trace of where our family came from. On social media, Ashley posted her gratitude. "So thankful for my amazing fiancé making our dream wedding possible." Not a word about the man signing the checks. I didn't say a thing. I just kept records, transfers, receipts, every dollar accounted for, because I've learned in my 68 years that truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to wait. Then, 3 weeks before the wedding, Ashley called a family meeting at their Greenwich house. The same house I'd paid the down payment on, $2.3 million, my signature on the papers. She called it a discussion about proper reception etiquette. "Mr. Miller," she began, her tone crisp, "you'll be hosting some very prominent guests. It might be best if you mingle with the other vendors." Vendors? She wanted me to sit with the caterers at my own son's wedding. That was the moment something in me shifted. I'd spent my life teaching young men how to read blueprints, how to build strong foundations. But that day I realized Ashley Sterling Miller had mistaken silence for weakness. She thought humility meant powerlessness. She was wrong. What Ashley didn't understand was that Miller Construction isn't a small business. It's an empire. 15 million in annual revenue. Government contracts worth 8 figures. Holdings across 3 states. But I drive a Ford F-250 and eat lunch from a cooler because comfort has never been the point. Ashley saw the truck, not the company behind it. The hands, not the mind. But when my accountant, Sarah, reviewed the books, she saw the truth. "Bill," she said, frowning at her monitor, "you've transferred almost $300,000 to David's accounts this year. House, wedding, allowances, what's going on?" Allowances. $45,000 a year for Ashley's social obligations. Designer handbags, weekly massages, private Pilates. The kind of spending that can't be justified unless you think the money will never stop. But what broke me wasn't the numbers. It was what she said about me behind my back. Tommy Johnson, my foreman of 20 years, has a daughter who works at the Greenwich Country Club. She overheard Ashley at brunch, laughing with her friends. "David's father is sweet," she'd said, "but so embarrassing. He came to dinner with dirt under his fingernails." I had to explain to Mother that David comes from humble beginnings. Humble beginnings? I started Miller Construction with a truck and a loan against my toolbox. I've built schools, hospitals, shelters, but to her I was an embarrassment. Another time she'd said, "You can't polish granite, you know." That was when I realized it wasn't just my pride she was mocking. It was my entire legacy. She was teaching my son to be ashamed of his bloodline. The more I looked, the worse it got. Ashley had convinced David that his Harvard MBA friends were laughing behind his back, that his father's trade was something to hide. He started missing Sunday dinners, claiming work. But I'd see photos later, country club events, charity galas, dinners, all funded by my money. And so, I stopped seeing my son as a victim of love and started seeing him as an accomplice in quiet betrayal. 3 weeks before the wedding, I made a phone call, not to my company attorney but to someone else. If someone's taking money from a family trust while publicly disrespecting the family patriarch, I asked, are there legal remedies? "Depends on the trust," the lawyer replied. "Do you have documentation?" I smiled. "Oh, I have documentation." That night, I opened the file cabinet in my study and took out an 89-page document. The prenuptial agreement Ashley had signed. Every line, every clause, every word, written by me. Not by a lawyer in an expensive suit, but by a man who'd studied law long before he ever picked up a hammer. Inside that document was Section 23, the Public Humiliation Clause. It stated that any act of public disrespect or class-based disparagement toward the Miller family would trigger an automatic review of trust assets and suspension of financial privileges. All I needed was for Ashley to be herself. The trap was set. She'd spent 2 years treating me like I didn't belong. What she didn't know was that the quiet, soft-spoken man in work boots was the architect of her downfall. All she had to do was light the match. And on her wedding day she'd do it. In front of 280 witnesses, 23,000 online viewers, and one federal judge who would make sure every consequence landed exactly where it belonged. But for now I kept smiling. I still said yes when she called. I still paid the invoices. I still wore the flannel shirt she hated. Because revenge, like construction, is all about timing. And time was almost up. Revenge doesn't begin with anger. It begins with understanding. You study the cracks, the weight points, the weaknesses in the structure. You learn exactly where to tap so that when it all collapses, it looks like it fell on its own. By the time Ashley called that final menu tasting at Meadowbrook Country Club, my plan was already in motion. I knew exactly who she was, and what kind of woman she'd become when surrounded by people she thought mattered. She believed she was walking into a wedding. She was actually walking into a courtroom, and I'd written the laws. When I arrived at the tasting, Ashley greeted me with her usual social smile, the kind that hides contempt behind perfect teeth. "David thinks you should be here, Mr. Miller, since you're contributing." Contributing. Like a distant uncle tossing in a check out of pity. The executive chef, Marcus Bradley, greeted me with respect. We'd worked together years ago when Miller Construction had renovated the east wing of Meadowbrook. "Mr. Miller, good to see you again. Your work still holds up beautifully." Ashley froze for half a second. "You two know each other?" Marcus smiled. "Bill's company did our east wing renovation. Ahead of schedule, under budget. Couldn't have asked for better." That moment, that tiny flicker in her eyes, was priceless. She just realized the man she thought was beneath her name carried weight in places she couldn't buy. But she recovered quickly. "Well, let's get started," she chirped, trying to regain control. The tasting unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. Ashley corrected everyone from the sommelier to the assistant chef, reciting etiquette as though she were lecturing a classroom. "The palate must be refined," she explained to David, "not rustic." Then she turned to me. "Mr. Miller, I hope the menu isn't too sophisticated for your tastes." I took a sip of the burgundy and smiled. "Nice structure. Reminds me of the 2009 Domaine de la Romanicanti I had in Napa." Her smile faltered. "You've been to Napa?" "Business trip," I replied casually. I didn't mention that the client had been a federal judge or that the trip had cost more than her wedding dress. The tasting continued: lamb with rosemary glaze, truffle risotto, imported caviar, all purchased with my money. Ashley kept talking, correcting, commanding. She explained the proper way to hold a wine glass to me, the man who'd probably poured more toasts on job site celebrations than she'd attended in her life. And then came the final insult. "David," she said sweetly, "we need to finalize the guest list. I've been thinking about your father's friends." I glanced up. "My friends?" "Yes. Those construction workers you invited, Tommy, wasn't it? And his wife. They're lovely, I'm sure, but Meadowbrook has standards. Tommy Johnson. My foreman for 2 decades. A man who'd worked through storms, heat waves, and nights that froze bone. The man who once pulled 3 injured workers out of a collapsed site with his bare hands. And Ashley wanted to uninvite him because his tuxedo wasn't designer." "Tommy stays," I said. Her expression tightened, but she masked it with a hostess smile. "Mr. Miller, I understand loyalty, but these guests are federal judges, executives, diplomats. Your workers might feel out of place. They built half the buildings those executives work in." "I'm sure they did," she said lightly. "But there's a difference between building something and belonging somewhere." That sentence hung in the air like a slap. David didn't defend me. He didn't say a word. He just looked down at his plate, a silent accomplice. Ashley continued as if I weren't even there. "I've curated the perfect guest list. People who understand proper etiquette and conversation. Tommy might feel more comfortable at a different kind of event." A different kind, meaning one where men like me belonged. A backyard barbecue. A world without crystal chandeliers or string quartets. Chef Marcus cleared his throat. "Would you like some privacy?" "No need," Ashley said briskly. "We're all family here." "Mostly family." That's what she said next. And that was when I knew she'd just confirmed what I needed to know. She didn't see me as family at all. Just the man footing the bill. I looked her straight in the eye. "You're right, Ashley. Tommy doesn't belong at your wedding. And neither do I." The table went silent. David looked up, startled. "Mr. Miller," she began. "No," I said quietly. "You were clear. I'm an embarrassment. My money is welcome, but my presence isn't." "That's fine. Enjoy your perfect day. All $300,000 of it." Her eyes widened. She hadn't known the exact figure. "The checks will clear. The champagne will flow. And when your guests ask where it all came from, you can tell them the truth or not. But remember something, Ashley. Respect isn't inherited. It's earned. And you just lost mine." I stood, adjusted my jacket, and walked out. That night, as I sat in my study, I opened the prenup again. 89 pages of cold precision. My fingerprints on every clause. The trap was set. All that was missing was her signature performance. The next morning, Ashley called me herself, the first time she'd ever dialed my number directly. "Mr. Miller, I think we should talk." "About what?" "Yesterday. I may have misspoken about the guest list." Misspoken. As if humiliation were a typo. "I'd like to meet," she said. "Clear the air. Maybe you could explain some of the venue contracts to me." "Contracts?" The word made me smile. She was starting to sense there were layers she didn't understand. We met at a coffee shop in Mount Vernon, neutral ground. She arrived in a brand new Tesla, white leather interior, temporary plates. David's gift, of course. My money, naturally. She sat across from me, her designer purse gleaming under the lights, her tone rehearsed. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Miller. Wedding planning has been overwhelming. I never meant to make you feel unwelcome. Your family." Her delivery was perfect. Eye contact, soft voice, even a hint of guilt. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed her. I appreciate that, I said evenly. She nodded, relieved, then shifted to what she really came for. David mentioned you helped with the prenup language. It's very comprehensive. 89 pages. That's not standard, is it? Depends on the assets involved. I've been reading it and honestly some of the clauses are unusual. Very detailed. Especially section 23. My pulse slowed. The mouse had found the cheese. What about it? I asked. It outlines behavior standards, witness requirements, verification protocols. It's almost like someone anticipated specific problems. I sipped my coffee. Good contracts do. She leaned in, eyes narrowing. Where did you learn to write something like this? The language, the structure, it reads like it was written by an attorney. 30 years in business teaches you a few things. Her smile was polite but uneasy. David said you never went to college. I didn't say that, I replied quietly. Her eyes flickered. There are law books in your garage, she said suddenly. I saw them when I came to pick up David last month. Commercial law, contract theory, constitutional precedents. They're old but well cared for. I smiled faintly. I like to read. Harvard Law Review, Volume 92, 1979, she pressed. Your name's on the subscription label. Now she'd done her homework. Impressive, too late but impressive. I'm asking you directly, Mr. Miller, she said softly. Did you write this prenup yourself? I let the silence stretch. Then, does it matter? You read it. Your attorney signed off. You agreed to every word. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. Her gaze sharpened. If you wrote this, then you designed it for a reason. What happens if I violate Section 23? Then the consequences apply just like any contract. And what exactly counts as a violation? You'll know, I said simply. Everyone will. I stood up, left a few bills on the table. You should read your prenup again, Ashley. All of it. Especially sections 20 through 31. Her voice followed me as I walked away. Are you threatening me? No, Ashley. Threats are what weak people use. I deal in contracts. That night I watched the clock strike midnight. 18 days until the wedding. 18 days until every insult, every smirk, every word dripping with class contempt would find its echo. Ashley thought she was marrying up. She had no idea she was walking straight into a masterpiece of retribution. Because sometimes the quiet ones don't raise their voices. They just write the rules. There's a stillness before destruction, a deceptive calm, like the air holding its breath before a storm. That's what I felt the morning of May 18, 2024, the day my son married the woman who'd mistaken my silence for surrender. Meadowbrook Country Club gleamed under a perfect blue sky. White orchids lined the entryway, violins murmured in the distance, and the scent of imported roses hung thick in the air. Ashley had crafted her dream wedding, 280 guests, $300,000 of perfection, and not 1 ounce of humility in sight. I arrived half an hour before the ceremony in pressed khakis and a navy blazer, respectable, simple, deliberate. I wasn't here to blend in or stand out. I was here to witness the moment she destroyed herself. Tommy Johnson and his wife Marie were already seated, grateful to be there. They didn't know Ashley had once tried to erase them from the guest list. The other tables shimmered with power, judges, senators, executives, socialites, the people Ashley had spent 2 years crawling toward, desperate to impress. And me? I sat quietly at table 12, far enough back that Ashley could pretend I wasn't really part of the picture. The ceremony began with theatrical precision. Ashley walked down the aisle in a custom Vera Wang gown, $18,500 of lace and illusion. Her confidence was blinding. Every step said, I've won. The vows were flawless. The photos even more so. Ashley had curated not a wedding, but an advertisement for herself. And David, poor boy, believed it. During cocktail hour, she floated from guest to guest, air-kissing judges' wives and bankers' daughters, her laughter perfectly timed, her tone perfectly sweet. She belonged to that world now, or so she thought. Dinner began with champagne toasts and polite applause. The first speeches were predictable, safe, shallow, forgettable. Then Ashley rose, glass in hand, glowing under the chandelier. I'd seen that glow before, the intoxication of being adored. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "if I could have your attention?" The band quieted. Conversations hushed. "I want to thank everyone here tonight," she continued, "for being part of our special day. David and I are so grateful to be surrounded by such wonderful friends and family." A polite ripple of applause followed. Then, with that same charming confidence, she turned the spotlight where it should never have gone. "You know," she said, smiling toward my table, "when David first brought me home, I wasn't sure what to expect. He comes from such humble beginnings." I felt the shift in the room, that quiet, uneasy stirring when people sense something wrong but can't yet name it. "His father William is here tonight," she continued brightly. "He owns a small construction company. A very sweet man, works with his hands." A few people chuckled politely, unsure whether to laugh or cringe. Ashley, emboldened by champagne, pressed on. "I'll admit at first I was nervous," she said, raising her glass. "I wasn't sure how someone from David's background would fit into our circle. But I've learned that love transcends class differences." Class differences. She said it like a confession, the rich girl's benevolence in marrying beneath her station. "William has been so generous helping with the wedding expenses," she continued. "It means so much to have family support, even from unexpected sources." Unexpected sources. Like discovering gold in a junkyard. "I know William probably feels a little out of place tonight," she went on, "but I want him to know he's welcome here, even if he doesn't quite understand our traditions." The words landed like stones. Guests shifted awkwardly. I could feel sympathy burning around me, pity from strangers who understood humiliation when they saw it. "So let's give a round of applause," Ashley finished, "to William Miller, the working man who helped make tonight possible." And then she started clapping. The applause spread, hesitant, uncomfortable. 280 people watching this sweet working-class father bask in his moment of polite condescension. I stood slowly, my smile calm, my pulse steady. I caught sight of one face, Judge Patricia Collins, seated near the front. Harvard Law School, class of '79. My classmate. Her expression was stone cold. Ashley wasn't finished. "David used to be embarrassed by his father's profession," she said with a giggle. "But I taught him there's no shame in honest work. Even if it's not exactly sophisticated." The room went still. Then the fatal words. "William, would you stand up? Let everyone see the man who built his little company from nothing." Little company. I stood there, beneath the chandelier's glare, watching my own son's bride turn my life's work into a heartwarming charity story. "Still has concrete dust under his fingernails," she joked. A few nervous laughs. "Tonight's costing more than his annual salary," she added, "but that's okay, we believe in taking care of family." That was it. The moment. The clause. The trigger. Public humiliation, check. Witnesses, check. Recorded evidence, 23,000 live viewers on her Instagram stream, check. Ashley Sterling Miller had just activated Section 23 of her prenup. I sat down again, still smiling. Minutes later, Patricia Collins rose from her seat. The room turned. You don't ignore a federal judge when she stands. "William Miller," she said clearly, her voice slicing through the murmurs, "Southern District of New York. We haven't seen each other since Harvard, have we?" You could have heard a pin drop. Ashley's face went pale. Patricia smiled faintly. "William finished in the top 10% of our class. Specialized in constitutional law and contract theory. He was one of the best writers I'd ever met." Whispers spread like wildfire. Ashley's laughter had died on her lips. "Didn't you handle the Consolidated Steel case in '85? Patricia continued. "Brilliant work, precedent-setting." I nodded quietly. "Among others." David stared at me speechless. Ashley's voice cracked. "You went to Harvard?" I turned to her. "Yes, I did." The crowd watched, spellbound, as Patricia continued. "And after your wife passed, you left law to build a company. A successful one from what I hear. You employ hundreds, don't you?" 260, I replied. Ashley's perfect posture was collapsing in on itself. Patricia glanced around the room, her voice crisp and commanding. "Well, that explains the quality of the legal drafting in a certain prenuptial agreement I reviewed recently. 89 pages. Impeccable work. Whoever wrote it understood not just law, but human behavior." Gasps rippled across the tables. Now everyone was looking at Ashley. Patricia's gaze found her again. "Tell me, Mrs. Miller, did you read Section 23 carefully before signing?" Ashley's voice was barely audible. What's happening?" Patricia continued as if she hadn't spoken. Section 23, the Public Humiliation Clause. It specifies that if the spouse of a Miller family member publicly disparages the patriarch in front of witnesses, the family trust undergoes immediate review. Trust fund access is frozen, assets re-evaluated, and all financial privileges suspended. Her words fell like hammer blows. Ashley's breath caught. "That's not. I didn't." Judge Collins' expression hardened. "Mrs. Miller, I've spent 20 years interpreting intent in courtrooms. What you just did was not gratitude, it was character assassination wrapped in champagne." The silence in that room was unbearable. Even the air felt heavy. I looked at Ashley and said quietly, "Intent doesn't matter. Impact does. You just violated your contract." David finally found his voice. "Dad, what does that mean?" "It means," I said, "your wife just lost access to the Miller family trust. All of it." Ashley's mouth opened but no sound came out. Patricia Collins nodded once. "In legal terms, Mr. Miller, you have every right to enforce immediate asset suspension." "Already in motion," I replied. And that's when it hit Ashley. Her smile. Her gown. Her fantasy life, all built on a foundation she didn't own. The crowd watched in stunned silence as she stumbled backward, the walls of her perfect world closing in. Tommy Johnson, sitting a few tables away, couldn't hold back a grin. The same man she'd once deemed unworthy was watching her empire collapse, brick by brick. The rest of the evening blurred. Ashley left in tears. David followed, confused and furious. But I stayed. I stayed because I wanted to remember the look on their faces, the exact moment when arrogance met consequence. 3 days. That's all the contract allowed before the enforcement kicked in. 72 hours for lawyers to make calls, for funds to freeze, for reality to set in. And as I walked out of Meadowbrook under a moonlit sky, I finally let myself smile, not with joy but with justice. For 2 years she'd built a palace of pretense, thinking my silence meant ignorance. But I'd built something stronger, a truth that couldn't be bought or hidden. By the time the guests returned to their champagne, the video of Ashley's speech had gone viral. Her own live stream had become her confession. And in that quiet, elegant room where she'd mocked the man who built her wedding, the foundation had already begun to crumble. Because humiliation doesn't end in laughter. It echoes, until the walls come down. The morning after the wedding was colder than it should have been for May. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way that silence stretched, tight as wire, over everything that followed. By 9 a.m., my attorney, Michael Rodriguez, already had the Instagram recording, the witness statements, and the contract file open on his desk. "Bill," he said, adjusting his glasses, "you have an airtight case. Section 23 was triggered publicly, with live evidence and hundreds of witnesses. There's no room for interpretation." I nodded once. I'd spent 2 years designing that clause, shaping it so there'd be no loopholes, no arguments about tone or intent. Public humiliation clearly defined. Behavior clauses precisely worded. Evidence protocols in place. Timeline? I asked. 72 hours from the triggering event, Michael said. By Thursday morning, trust access freezes automatically. No court intervention needed. I'd written it that way for a reason. Fast enough to block any asset hiding, slow enough to make the realization hurt. Her attorney's been calling all morning, Michael added. Wants to negotiate. I smiled faintly. She should have read the contract more carefully. He opened the folder again. Let's go over the violations. Subsection A, public disparagement of family members. Subsection B, class-based discrimination. Subsection C, financial manipulation acknowledgement. Subsection D, recorded evidence standard. Every single one violated on record, broadcast to 23,000 viewers. Ashley Sterling Miller's toast had become her confession. Michael's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. That's David. Put him on speaker, I said. Dad, David's voice came through, strained, panicked. What the hell is happening? Ashley's crying. Her lawyer says we're losing the house. You're not losing anything, I replied calmly. Ashley is. But we live together. You signed a prenuptial agreement. Separate assets, conditional access. She violated the conditions. Dad, she didn't mean. Intent doesn't matter, son. Behavior does. There was a long pause. I could hear his breathing on the line. She humiliated me, I said quietly, in front of judges, executives, people who've known me for 40 years. She called me little people, told the world my work wasn't sophisticated. And she did it while spending my money. She was nervous, she was arrogant, I interrupted. And she learned where arrogance leads. Silence again. What happens now? David finally asked. That depends on her. What do you mean? The contract doesn't just punish, I said. It offers a way back. Section 24, the redemption clauses. Michael glanced up. You actually wrote those in? Always leave room for rebuilding, I said. Even in demolition. David's voice was softer now. What do they say? They say that dignity can be restored, but only through action. Public acknowledgement, personal accountability, and genuine change. Change how? She'll find out. Dad, please. She wants to apologize. Then she'll have to do it where it counts. By Tuesday morning, 48 hours in, Ashley's attorney called again. This time her voice trembled. Mrs. Miller is prepared to comply with the redemption provisions. I met with Michael to outline the next steps. The process was designed to hurt but not destroy, to rebuild through humility. Step 1, public acknowledgement. Ashley had to post a video on the same Instagram account where she'd mocked me. 23,000 followers would watch her admit that she'd been wrong, that she'd misjudged, insulted, and humiliated her father-in-law. She did 3 takes. The first 2 were polished, the kind of apology crafted for image. I rejected both. The third was real. Her eyes were red, her voice cracked, and her pride finally gave way to honesty. Within 24 hours, her following dropped by more than half. Greenwich society doesn't forgive humility, it feeds on pretense. Step 2, personal amends. Ashley drove to Tommy Johnson's modest home in Yonkers. She sat across from the man she'd once called unsuitable and cried. Told him she was ashamed. Told Marie she'd been wrong. Marie made her coffee and listened while Ashley confessed how small her world had been. They talked for 2 hours. Tommy called me afterward and said, "Boss, she means it." You can hear it in her voice. Step 3, financial transparency. She had to go public with the truth about her spending, every wedding expense, every gift, every dollar pulled from the family trust. $300,000 total. The down payment on her house. The Tesla. The monthly allowance. All listed, all posted. Her so-called friends reacted exactly as I expected, quietly, cruelly. Invitations vanished. Text messages went unanswered. Her seat at the country club table disappeared overnight. Step 4, the behavioral clause, 6 months of rebuilding. Every Sunday, Ashley and David would join me for dinner at my home. No country clubs. No catered perfection. Just family, my cooking, and a table scarred from years of blueprints and coffee cups. The first dinner was uncomfortable. Ashley sat stiffly, afraid to speak. But when Tommy stopped by to drop off paperwork, she asked him about the new hospital project. Listened carefully. Even asked questions about foundation work. For the first time, she wasn't performing, she was learning. Step 5, service. Ashley was required to volunteer 6 months with Habitat for Humanity, working alongside construction crews, the same kind of people she once mocked. The first week, she complained about blisters and dust. The second week, she said less. By the third, she started showing up early. When she helped frame her first wall, sweat soaking through her gloves, arms aching, she smiled at me across the site and said, "This is harder than it looks." Yes, I told her. And worth it. The transformation was slow, painful, and public. Greenwich society, once her playground, turned its back on her. But in that exile, Ashley began finding herself, or maybe discovering who she could have been all along. David struggled too. His colleagues whispered, gossiped, treated him like the son of scandal. But something changed in him as well. He started visiting construction sites again. Watched Tommy's team pour concrete. Asked questions. For the first time in years, he looked at me not as the man who embarrassed him, but as the man who built everything he stood on. The house and car reverted to the family trust. They could live there, but only while upholding the behavioral standards. No luxury allowance, no entitlement. Just enough to live with dignity, not vanity. 6 weeks after the wedding, Judge Patricia Collins called me. "William," she said, "Harvard Law is studying your contract. They're calling it behavioral enforcement through moral accountability." I laughed softly. "Didn't mean to write a case study, Patricia." "You wrote justice," she said. "A new kind. Justice. Maybe that's what it was, though not the kind delivered in courtrooms. It was quieter, more human. The kind that doesn't just punish, it teaches." Months passed. Ashley's social circle crumbled, but something else took root in its place. She began helping Marie with charity projects, organizing tool drives for low-income neighborhoods. Her manicured hands were calloused now. Her designer wardrobe replaced with work jeans and steel-toe boots. One Saturday, I visited her at a habitat site. She was kneeling in the dirt, laying tiles for a kitchen floor. Her hair was tied back, her cheeks flushed. When she looked up, she smiled. Not the practiced smile I'd come to expect, but one that reached her eyes. "Look," she said, pointing to her work, "it's level." "It is," I said. "You did that right." 6 months later, she completed her final requirement, building a house for a veteran and his family. At the celebration dinner, she handed me a framed photo of the finished home. "For you," she said quietly, "to remind you that sometimes broken things can be rebuilt." I didn't have words. For the first time in years, I saw sincerity without pride, strength without arrogance. That night at family dinner, Ashley came early, wearing jeans and a plain white shirt. She set the table herself, poured coffee, and joined the conversation like she'd always belonged. When it grew quiet, she looked at me and said, "Bill, I want to thank you." "For what?" "For not letting me stay awful." David smiled beside her. She continued, voice trembling but steady. "I was raised to think class was about money. I thought being polished meant being better. You showed me it's about respect, about building something real. You could have cut us off. Instead, you gave me a second chance." I leaned back, watching her, this woman who'd once sneered at dirt under my nails, now proud of the calluses on her own hands. "You learned because you wanted to," I said. "I just gave you the blueprint." David reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "We're rebuilding, Dad," he said. "Together." I nodded. "Then it worked." Ashley smiled, tears glinting in her eyes. "And I promise, I'll never forget where this family came from again." "Good," I said softly. "Because that's the only kind of wealth that lasts." Later, when the dishes were done and the house was quiet, I stood on the porch watching the sun sink behind the hills. Tommy's truck rumbled past, the sound of real work echoing into the evening. For the first time in a long time, everything felt steady, built on something solid. Have you ever been underestimated because of where you came from? Have you ever let them laugh only to let time speak for you? Because sometimes revenge isn't about destruction. It's about rebuilding what they tried to tear down, and making them part of the lesson. Sometimes the quiet ones really do have the sharpest teeth. The porch was quiet that night. The kind of quiet that doesn't need words to prove it's won. The sky hung low over the hills, washed in the faint glow of dusk. In the distance, I could still hear Tommy's truck rumbling toward tomorrow, steady, honest, unpretentious. For the first time in a long time, the world felt level again. No more pretense. No more performance. Just the sound of something real being rebuilt from the ruins of pride. Because in the end, I didn't need to destroy her to win. I only needed her to see. Revenge built the foundation. Redemption finished the house. And on its door, carved deep enough to last longer than any fortune, were the only words that ever truly mattered. Respect isn't inherited, it's earned.